My heart dropped into my stomach. Professional conduct? I'd been Employee of the Month twice this year at Morrison Financial Group. I'd brought in 3 major accounts and saved the company over $60,000 with my process improvements. I don't understand, I said quietly, keeping my voice steady despite feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. What kind of concerns? Kenneth exchanged a look with Rebecca, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. We can't discuss specifics, but maintaining appropriate boundaries with vendors is crucial in our industry. The implication hit me like a slap across the face. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague Maria. Something weird is going around about you. We need to talk ASAP. I met Maria in the parking garage during lunch break, my hands trembling as she told me what she'd overheard in the break room. Kenneth had been spreading rumors that I'd been having inappropriate relationships with male vendors, suggesting I was trading favors for better deals on our accounts. He's telling people you've been meeting clients at hotels, Maria whispered, her voice filled with disgust. It's completely sick, Olivia. Everyone knows you're the most professional person in this office. I felt like I might throw up right there in the parking garage. At 52 years old, I'd built my reputation on integrity and hard work. Kenneth knew exactly how damaging these lies would be in our conservative company culture. Who was he told? I asked, dreading the answer. The senior management group chat, Maria replied sadly. I saw Tom's phone when the message came through. Kenneth sent it with laughing emojis like it was some kind of joke. My hands shook as I checked my work email. There it was, a private message thread called Leadership Updates that I wasn't included in. Through Maria's phone, I could see my colleagues making crude jokes about my supposed client entertainment methods and Olivia's special sales techniques. The betrayal burned deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. These were people I'd worked alongside for 5 years, colleagues who knew my character and work ethic. The isolation started immediately. During our weekly team meeting the next day, conversations stopped when I entered the room. Tom Wilson, who usually chatted with me about his grandchildren, barely acknowledged my presence. The monthly team lunch invitation never arrived in my email. I watched from my cubicle as Kenneth presented my quarterly analysis to the board, taking full credit for work I'd spent weeks perfecting. When I tried to contribute during the discussion, he cut me off with, "I think we have enough input for now, Olivia." The worst part was watching Kenneth thrive while I sat in corporate purgatory. He strutted around the office like he owned the place, accepting praise for my projects while I became invisible to my own team. That afternoon, my mentor Patricia from the accounting department discreetly approached my desk. "Olivia, honey," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "be very careful with Kenneth. He pulled this same stunt with another woman who worked here before you started. She quit rather than fight him. Don't let him win." Her words hit me like lightning. I wasn't Kenneth's first victim, just his latest target, but unlike his previous victim, I had no intention of quietly disappearing. Instead of crying in the bathroom like Kenneth probably expected, I started documenting everything. Every meeting, every email, every instance of being excluded went into a detailed log with dates, times, and witnesses. I kept my emotions in check at work while methodically building my case. I began recording every interaction with Kenneth, noting how his behavior had changed dramatically after I'd politely declined his invitation to dinner at an expensive steakhouse 3 weeks earlier. He'd called it a strategy session, but his leering smile had made my skin crawl. When I requested a copy of my personnel file from HR, Rebecca seemed nervous. "Is everything all right, Olivia?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Just reviewing my performance history for my annual review," I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. The file arrived 2 days later, and what I found made my blood boil. There was a note dated just last week, an anonymous complaint about inappropriate behavior with male vendors that definitely hadn't been there during my previous review. The accusations were vague but damaging, carefully worded to plant seeds of doubt without providing specific details. Most suspicious of all, the complaint mentioned meetings with a vendor named Richard Thompson from Precision Office Solutions, a man I'd only ever spoken to over the phone. I stared at that anonymous complaint until my eyes burned. The timing was too convenient, the details too specific to be random office gossip. Someone had deliberately planted this lie in my permanent record, and I had a pretty good idea who. My desk phone rang unexpectedly. An outside line I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Hi, is this Olivia Martinez? This is Javid Thompson from Precision Office Solutions. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but something really strange happened, and I thought you should know about it. My heart stopped. The very vendor mentioned in the anonymous complaint was calling me out of the blue. Yesterday, your manager Kenneth called me, Javid continued, his voice troubled. He asked some really inappropriate questions about our business relationship. He wanted me to confirm that we'd met privately outside your office. When I told him we'd only ever talked on the phone, he got pretty pushy about it. I gripped the phone tighter. What exactly did he say? He suggested that if I backed up his version of events, my company's contract renewal would get fast-tracked. When I told him I wouldn't lie about a professional woman's reputation, he got angry and started making threats about finding new suppliers. The pieces were falling into place. Kenneth wasn't just spreading rumors, he was trying to manufacture fake evidence to support his lies. Javid, I said carefully, would you be willing to document what happened in that phone call? Already ahead of you, he replied. I recorded the whole conversation. It's legal here as long as one party knows about it. What this guy tried to do to your reputation is just wrong. I've got daughters your age, and I'd want someone to help them if they were in your situation. That evening, Javid emailed me the audio file. Kenneth's voice was crystal clear as he tried to pressure an honest businessman into supporting fabricated accusations. In the recording, Kenneth even laughed about putting that uptight woman in her place and teaching her what happens when she doesn't play ball. I saved multiple copies of the file and forwarded it to my personal email account. But I didn't confront Kenneth right away. Instead, I called my friend Janet, who worked as a paralegal at an employment law firm downtown. This is textbook sexual harassment and defamation, Janet told me after listening to the recording. The retaliation angle makes it even worse. Your company's employee handbook has strict policies against this exact behavior. I had solid proof, but I knew Kenneth had connections and influence in the company. One recording wouldn't be enough to completely destroy someone who'd spent years building political alliances. I needed to be patient and strategic, gathering more evidence before making my move. The next morning, Kenneth called me into his corner office for a private meeting. He sat behind his massive oak desk with a condescending smile, gesturing for me to take the chair facing him like a child being called to the principal's office. Olivia, he began, his voice sickeningly sweet, I want you to know I still believe in your potential. But you need to understand why some people might get the wrong impression about your behavior with our male vendors and clients. I bit my tongue and nodded, playing the role of the confused employee seeking guidance from her wise superior. Maybe you've been a little too friendly in your communications, he continued, clearly enjoying his position of power. In business, a woman has to be extra careful about appearances. Perhaps you should reflect on why people might see you in this light. His words made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral. What would you recommend I do differently? Be more professional in your interactions. Stay focused on your assigned tasks instead of trying to network so aggressively with our suppliers. Not everyone appreciates an ambitious woman your age. I left his office feeling disgusted but more determined than ever. Kenneth thought he was breaking me down, but he was actually helping me build an even stronger case against him. That afternoon, I discovered that my biggest project had been reassigned to Marcus, a junior analyst with less than 2 years of experience. Instead of protesting the reassignment, I gracefully accepted it and even offered to help train Marcus on the project details. My cooperation clearly surprised Kenneth, who had obviously expected an emotional outburst he could use against me. Meanwhile, I quietly began applying for positions at competing firms. My reputation in the industry was still intact outside Morrison Financial Group, and several companies showed immediate interest in my background and experience. Within 2 weeks, I received an invitation to interview with Sterling Capital Management, one of our biggest competitors. The regional director, Patricia Wells, was a respected woman in finance who had built her department's reputation on ethical business practices and supporting professional women. Your portfolio is very impressive, Patricia said during our discreet lunch meeting at a restaurant across town. We've been looking for someone with your expertise in client relationship management and process improvement. The offer exceeded my expectations. Senior manager position, 18% salary increase, and direct reporting to Patricia herself. But I asked for 4 weeks to wrap up my current projects and responsibilities. Of course, she agreed. We value professionals who honor their commitments, even in difficult situations. As I drove home that evening, I felt a calm determination settle over my mind. Kenneth thought he had me cornered, but I was actually positioning myself for the perfect counterattack. My former intern Ashley reached out through LinkedIn that weekend. She'd left Morrison Financial Group 8 months earlier, citing personal reasons in her exit interview. When I called her that evening, our conversation revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior. Kenneth tried the same tactics on me, Ashley confessed over the phone. He started rumors that I was sleeping with one of the senior associates to get better assignments. When I complained to HR, he made my life so miserable that I had to quit. My anger burned hotter as she described Kenneth's systematic harassment of younger women in the office. Why didn't you fight back harder? I was just an intern fresh out of college. Who would believe me over a director with 15 years at the company? But Olivia, I kept everything. Screenshots of messages, emails where he bragged to other managers about keeping difficult women in line. She sent me a folder of evidence that made my stomach turn. Kenneth's messages to other male colleagues showed a clear pattern of targeting women who showed ambition or refused his advances. In one particularly damning email thread, he'd boasted about making that uppity intern disappear after Ashley had rejected his invitation to a private weekend conference. The evidence was overwhelming. Kenneth wasn't just a workplace bully. He was a predator who had been systematically destroying women's careers for years. Now I had enough ammunition to completely destroy him. The company's annual holiday party provided the perfect opportunity for my next strategic move. Kenneth was being honored for his outstanding leadership and team-building excellence in front of the entire firm. I watched him preen in his expensive suit, accepting praise for achievements that belonged to the women he'd driven away. When they opened the floor for appreciation comments, I stood gracefully and approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm and clear. "Working under Kenneth's leadership has taught me valuable lessons about integrity in business." Kenneth beamed, expecting typical corporate praise. "I've learned that true leadership means protecting the people under your care, especially when they can't protect themselves. Someone once said that character is what you do when no one is watching, or when you think your victim won't fight back." The room fell completely silent. Kenneth's smile froze on his face as several colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The pointed reference hit its target. Everyone understood the implication without me making direct accusations. Rebecca from HR looked pale as she processed my words. Several women in the audience nodded knowingly, recognizing the coded message about workplace harassment. I returned to my table quietly, leaving Kenneth to finish his acceptance speech to a much cooler and more skeptical audience. The following Monday, I requested a formal mediation session with HR. Instead of making direct accusations, I framed it as wanting to resolve misunderstandings that were affecting my work environment and team relationships. "I'd like to address some misconceptions about my professional conduct," I told Rebecca during our scheduling meeting. "I believe in transparency and want to clear the air about any confusion regarding my client relationships." My approach completely threw Kenneth and HR off balance. They'd expected either a resignation letter or an emotional breakdown, not a calm request for formal mediation. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Meanwhile, Kenneth's confidence grew dangerously high. That Thursday evening, several colleagues spotted him at a business networking event downtown, drinking too much and bragging loudly about his management strategies for handling difficult employees. "Sometimes you have to remind these career women of their place in the hierarchy," he told a group at the bar, unaware that one of his listeners was David Chen, a compliance officer from the State Labor Department who knew me through professional circles. David called me the next morning. "Olivia, I witnessed something last night that you absolutely need to know about. Kenneth made some very inappropriate comments about managing female employees that could constitute evidence of discrimination. The trap was closing around Kenneth and his own arrogance was pulling it tighter." 2 weeks later, my department transfer came through. I was being moved to a different division to provide fresh perspectives and reduce interpersonal tensions, according to the official memo. I accepted the reassignment without complaint, maintaining my professional demeanor while colleagues watched for my reaction. My new position placed me in the budget analysis department, where I had access to financial records and expense reports from multiple divisions. Within just a few days of starting my new role, I noticed irregularities in Kenneth's department spending that set off every alarm bell in my accounting-trained mind. Conference expenses that didn't match actual event dates, client entertainment charges that far exceeded company limits, and travel reimbursements for trips that never appeared on any calendar or meeting schedule. The pattern suggested systematic financial misconduct spanning at least 2 years. I carefully documented everything and made copies of the relevant receipts and reports, storing them securely at home. Kenneth's corruption went far beyond workplace harassment. He was literally stealing from the company through fraudulent expense claims. The irony was perfect. Kenneth had transferred me to a position where I could discover his financial crimes. His arrogance and need for control had led him directly into my trap. The mediation session finally arrived and I entered the conference room fully prepared for battle. Kenneth sat confidently beside his union representative, while I had my friend Janet attending as my legal advisor. "I want to address the rumors that have been affecting my professional reputation," I began calmly, placing a thick folder on the conference table. "I have substantial evidence that these accusations are not only completely false, but were deliberately fabricated." I played Javed Thompson's recording for the entire room. Kenneth's face went from confident to pale as his own voice filled the air, attempting to coerce false testimony from an honest vendor. His union representative's expression shifted from supportive to horrified. "Furthermore," I continued, opening my evidence folder, "my new position has allowed me to discover serious financial irregularities in Kenneth's department that require immediate investigation." I presented copies of the fraudulent expense reports, highlighting the suspicious patterns and timeline. Rebecca from HR looked like she might faint as she realized the full scope of Kenneth's misconduct. "We need to bring in legal counsel immediately," Rebecca stammered, clearly overwhelmed. Kenneth finally found his voice. "This is a vindictive witch hunt. She's manufacturing evidence because she didn't get promoted." But his desperate protests rang hollow against the mountain of documented proof I'd systematically assembled. The meeting ended with Kenneth suspended, pending a comprehensive investigation. News of Kenneth's suspension spread through the office faster than wildfire. Colleagues who had shunned me for weeks suddenly appeared at my desk with awkward apologies and expressions of belated support. The private group chat that had mocked my reputation was quietly disbanded. Tom Wilson approached me with genuine remorse written all over his face. "Olivia, I owe you a sincere apology. I should have known better than to believe office gossip about someone with your character and work ethic. I'm ashamed that I let rumors cloud my judgment." I accepted his apology gracefully, though I knew rebuilding these damaged relationships would take considerable time and effort. Trust, once shattered by cowardice and cruel gossip, couldn't be repaired overnight. The investigation moved swiftly once the company's legal team became involved. They brought in external auditors to examine Kenneth's financial activities, while employment attorneys reviewed his documented pattern of harassment complaints. Within 1 week, 3 additional women came forward with similar stories of Kenneth's inappropriate behavior. Ashley's detailed testimony was particularly damaging, as her documented evidence strongly corroborated my claims about Kenneth's systematic targeting of ambitious women. Kenneth's carefully constructed image as a respected department director crumbled as the ugly truth emerged. The final nail in Kenneth's professional coffin came from an unexpected source. Patricia from accounting discovered that Kenneth had been falsifying client satisfaction surveys to inflate his performance metrics for annual reviews. The man who had accused me of unprofessional conduct had been systematically lying to upper management for over 3 years. When confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Kenneth's union representative strongly advised him to resign immediately, rather than face certain termination and potential criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. His resignation letter was brief and completely defensive, claiming he was leaving to pursue new opportunities in consulting without acknowledging any wrongdoing whatsoever. But the damage to his professional reputation was absolutely irreversible. Within hours of the resignation announcement, Kenneth's profile was quietly removed from the company website, and his scheduled presentation at the upcoming regional finance conference was abruptly canceled. Industry colleagues who had previously sought his advice and partnerships suddenly stopped returning his phone calls. I received dozens of supportive messages from coworkers expressing admiration for my courage in standing up to workplace harassment. Many women privately thanked me for showing them that they didn't have to silently tolerate abuse from male supervisors. The vindication felt incredibly sweet, but the real satisfaction came from knowing Kenneth would never again be in a position to destroy another woman's career. Kenneth called me 3 days after his forced resignation, his voice lacking any trace of its usual arrogance and superiority. "Olivia, can we please talk? I think there might have been some misunderstandings about everything that happened between us." I agreed to one brief phone conversation, curious to hear his final attempt at manipulation and damage control. "Look, maybe I made some poor judgment calls along the way," he began, still unable to fully acknowledge his deliberate misconduct. "But you completely destroyed my career over a few inappropriate comments. That seems pretty extreme, don't you think?" His pathetic attempt to minimize years of systematic harassment was the final insult. "Kenneth," I replied with ice-cold calm, "you didn't make judgment calls. You made calculated decisions to destroy women's careers when they refused your advances. You brought this on yourself." I hung up before he could respond, feeling a deep sense of closure wash over me. 2 weeks later, Kenneth's downfall became even more public when a local business journal published an exposé about workplace harassment in the financial services industry. While they didn't name him directly, the details were specific enough that everyone in our professional community knew exactly who the article was describing. The piece quoted anonymous sources who detailed Kenneth's pattern of retaliating against women who rejected his advances, his fraudulent expense reporting, and his systematic destruction of female employees' reputations. The article sparked industry-wide conversations about accountability and protecting women in male-dominated fields. I hadn't leaked the story myself, but I suspected Ashley or one of Kenneth's other victims had finally decided to go public with their experiences. The media attention ensured that Kenneth's professional reputation was destroyed not just locally, but throughout the entire regional finance community. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues expressing amazement at my strategic patience and thorough preparation. Several women reached out to share their own stories of workplace harassment, inspired by my example to finally speak up about their experiences. Kenneth's name became synonymous with everything wrong with old boy corporate culture. A cautionary tale shared in professional development seminars and HR training sessions. 3 months after Kenneth's resignation, I officially started my new position at Sterling Capital Management. Patricia Wells had been true to her word. The environment was supportive, collaborative, and built on mutual respect, rather than intimidation and power games. On my first day, Patricia introduced me to the team as someone who exemplifies the integrity and professionalism we value most in our industry. Several colleagues mentioned they'd heard about my situation at Morrison Financial Group and expressed admiration for how I'd handled it. "You showed a lot of women that we don't have to just take it when men try to destroy our careers," my new teammate Sandra told me during our first team lunch. "That takes real courage." I was invited to speak at a Women in Finance networking event the following month. The topic was protecting your professional reputation in challenging environments. and I accepted the opportunity to share my experience with other women facing similar situations. Meanwhile, I heard through industry connections that Kenneth had been forced to move to another state after failing to find employment anywhere in our region. His wife had reportedly filed for divorce after learning about his pattern of harassment, and he'd lost most of his professional network. The consequences of his actions continued to ripple outward, exactly as they should. During my presentation at the Women's Networking event, I looked out at an audience of 200 professional women and felt a deep sense of purpose. These were mothers, grandmothers, daughters, and sisters who deserve to work without fear of harassment or retaliation. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to be heard, I told them, thinking about my quiet strategy and patient documentation. Sometimes you just need to raise your standards and let the truth speak for itself. The audience erupted in applause, and several women approached me afterward to share their own stories. One grandmother told me she'd been inspired to file a formal complaint against her supervisor after years of tolerating inappropriate comments. If you can take down someone as powerful as Kenneth Morrison, then maybe there's hope for the rest of us, she said with tears in her eyes. After the event, I received an unexpected email that made me smile. A documentary filmmaker had read about my story and wanted to discuss optioning it for a feature film about women fighting workplace harassment. Your story represents something important about patience, strategy, and the power of truth, the producer wrote. Would you be interested in helping us bring this message to a wider audience? I stared at the email for a long moment, thinking about all the women who might benefit from seeing that bullies can be defeated through careful planning and unwavering determination. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate satisfaction, it's permanent change that protects future generations. 6 months later, I sat in my comfortable office at Sterling Capital Management, reviewing quarterly reports and enjoying the respectful professional environment Patricia had created. My phone rang with a call from Rebecca at Morrison Financial Group. Olivia, I hope you're doing well, she began nervously. I'm calling because we've discovered additional evidence of Kenneth's misconduct, and we wanted to inform you that we're implementing new harassment prevention policies. Your case was instrumental in helping us recognize serious gaps in our system. I listened as she described mandatory training programs, anonymous reporting systems, and strict accountability measures for management. My ordeal had forced the company to confront its toxic culture and implement real protections for employees. We also wanted to ask if you'd consider serving on our advisory committee for workplace culture reform, Rebecca continued. Your insights would be invaluable in preventing future incidents. I politely declined the committee invitation. I had no interest in helping Morrison Financial Group repair the damage they should have prevented in the first place. But I was satisfied knowing that future employees would have better protections than I'd had. That afternoon, Ashley called with exciting news. She'd been hired as a senior analyst at a prestigious investment firm, and her new manager was a woman who actively mentored younger employees. I finally found a place where ambition is rewarded instead of punished, Ashley said happily, and I have you to thank for showing me that we don't have to accept being treated badly. The documentary about my experience premiered at a regional film festival the following year. Watching actors portray my story on screen felt surreal, but the message resonated powerfully with audiences. The film focused on the importance of documentation, strategic thinking, and supporting other women facing similar challenges. During the Q&A session after the screening, a young woman in the audience stood up with tears in her eyes. My grandmother is dealing with harassment at her job right now, and she was ready to just quit rather than fight. After seeing this film, I'm going to help her document everything and find a lawyer. The moderator asked me what advice I'd give to women facing workplace retaliation. I thought carefully before answering. Don't let anger make you impulsive, I said. Document everything, build your case methodically, and remember that bullies count on you being too emotional or scared to fight back strategically. Your patience and preparation are your greatest weapons. The film went on to win several awards and was eventually distributed to HR departments and business schools as a training tool. Kenneth's story became a case study in how harassment and retaliation could destroy not just individual careers, but entire corporate reputations. Justice had taken time, but it had been thorough and lasting. 2 years after Kenneth's downfall, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from him. He'd apparently been working as a freelance consultant in another state, struggling to rebuild his shattered reputation. "Olivia, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my behavior and the pain I caused you and other women," the message read. "I know an apology can't undo the damage, but I want you to know that I'm in therapy and trying to understand why I acted so badly. You deserved better, and I'm sorry." I stared at the message for several minutes, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me appreciated that he'd finally acknowledged his wrongdoing, but I also recognized that his apology was likely motivated by his continued professional struggles rather than genuine remorse. I chose not to respond. Kenneth had taken enough of my time and energy over the years. My silence would have to serve as my final statement on our professional relationship. Instead, I focused my attention on mentoring young women entering the finance industry, sharing the lessons I'd learned about protecting themselves and standing up to workplace bullies. The best use of my experience wasn't relitigating the past, it was preventing future victims. 3 years later, I was promoted to vice president at Sterling Capital Management, overseeing a team of 15 professionals in 3 different offices. Patricia had been promoted to regional director, creating an opportunity for me to step into greater leadership responsibilities. During my first team meeting as VP, I looked around the conference table at the diverse group of talented professionals I now supervised. Half of them were women, including several who had joined the company specifically because of its reputation for supporting female employees. "My management philosophy is simple," I told them. "Respect, integrity, and accountability. We celebrate success together, we support each other through challenges, and we never tolerate behavior that diminishes anyone's dignity or potential." One of my team members, a recent MBA graduate named Christine, approached me after the meeting. "I just wanted to say that hearing your story was one of the reasons I chose to work here," she said. "You showed that it's possible to fight back against harassment and actually win." I smiled, thinking about how far we'd all come. The key is remembering that you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for every woman who comes after you. 5 years after the Kenneth Morrison scandal, I was invited to give the keynote address at the National Women in Finance Conference. Standing at the podium before an audience of over 1,000 professionals, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silenced," I told the crowd. "Document everything. Build your allies carefully, and never underestimate the power of truth combined with patience." I shared the lessons I'd learned about strategic thinking, professional integrity, and the importance of supporting other women facing similar challenges. The audience's enthusiasm was overwhelming, with several standing ovations throughout my presentation. After my speech, dozens of women approached me with their own stories of workplace harassment and discrimination. Many credited my example with giving them the courage to fight back against their own tormentors. "You showed us that we don't have to just endure abuse," one grandmother told me, gripping my hand tightly. "You proved that careful planning can defeat powerful bullies." As I flew home that evening, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Kenneth Morrison had tried to destroy my career out of petty revenge and male ego. Instead, he'd unknowingly launched me toward greater success and influence than I'd ever imagined possible. Today, 10 years after that awful meeting in Morrison Financial Group's conference room, I serve as Senior Vice President of Sterling Capital Management and sit on the boards of 3 professional organizations dedicated to supporting women in finance. Kenneth Morrison's name is still occasionally mentioned in workplace harassment training seminars, but only as a cautionary tale about the consequences of toxic behavior. His career never recovered from the scandal, and he eventually left the finance industry entirely. Meanwhile, Ashley became a successful portfolio manager and frequently speaks about her experience to young professionals. Patricia retired with full honors and continues to mentor women executives. Javid Thompson still runs his office supply company and has become an advocate for ethical business practices. My story has been featured in business schools, HR training programs, and documentaries about workplace equality. But the impact I'm most proud of is the dozens of women who've told me that my example gave them the courage to stand up for themselves. During a recent interview with a business magazine, the reporter asked what I wanted my legacy to be. I thought for a moment before answering. I want women to know that they don't have to choose between their dignity and their careers, I said. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to raise your standards and let the truth do the talking. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message that made me smile. We'd like to option your story for a Netflix limited series. Interested? Some stories are worth telling again and again, especially when they remind people that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied.